Shalom, everyone. My name is Tony Pino, and today we're going to be looking at a video by R.L. Solberg. His ministry is called Defending the Biblical Roots of Christianity, and he is interviewing a man named Ruben Gomez, who is a minister, scholar, translator, and author from Spain, who also did a book on the Hebrew roots and the dangers of that. So these guys have gotten together. Mr. Solberg has done Torahism, where he tries to warn people the dangers of the Hebrew roots movement. So they are collaborating their thoughts and their ideas, trying to warn people in many ways trying to call it a conspiracy theory and so forth. What we are going to do is watch it. I'm going to give some commentary on what I believe is correct and incorrect in their analysis. And you guys be the judge for yourself. Study to show yourself approve. What is often done, and it's done on both sides. We all have to be careful of it. I've been guilty of it too, is when you start making sweeping comments about a particular movement, right? And you start saying things, let's say about the Hebrew roots movement. They're all two-house theology people. They all believe that they're Israelites. It makes it seem like everyone in the Hebrew roots thinks that they are now Israelites, that they're ethnically Israel because of this movement. And that's just, that's so false. Within the Hebrew roots movement, no matter what title you give it, Messianic Judaism, people of the way, Nazarenes, or so forth, because you're trying to distinguish yourself from other groups, someone's going to go ahead and attach their group or their name to that title. All right. And you're not going to like it because it's not going to rightfully represent you. And you're concerned about how that, will be seen by others. Well, within Christianity, it's the same thing. I can stand here and say, well, Christians believe in praying to Mary, and she's the, intermediary between you and Yeshua. And, you need to have a rosary. That's the right thing to do. All Christians need to, have rosaries, and they go to confession, and they believe in transubstantiation, and they believe in the doctrine of original sin, and so forth. And there are many sects within Christianity that don't hold to those doctrines I just mentioned. There are many that do, many that don't, right? And so they wouldn't want to be connected to those doctrines. So when I say Christians believe this and Christians believe that, we do have to be careful, and we do have to watch what we say. So we all need to do that. I think, sometimes we all get our focus on a particular thing, and so we kind of run with it. So I'm going to do my best to do better at it. And of course, you're going to see it here also, these sweeping remarks. So we got to be careful. All right. Now, if you find that you like this video after watching it, you want to know more about what I teach, just hit that subscribe button there. That'll take you to my YouTube channel where you can see many other teachings that I do on many other topics. You can hit the like button, hit the comment button, leave me a comment, whether you agree or disagree. That's perfectly fine as long as it's cordial. All right. And of course, pass the video around. I'd appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get to the video now and see what Mr. Solberg and Mr. Gomez have to say about the Hebrew roots movement.
Welcome, everybody, to Defending the Biblical Roots of Christianity. And today we have an exciting guest. Now, his name may not be familiar to you yet, but we're going to hear a lot of very interesting things from a friend from across the pond. We'll be talking with Mr. Ruben Gomez, who has written a book we'll be talking about today called Hebrew Roots. Very interesting to kind of get a global view of what we have going on. And we're going to dig into this book because this is a great resource. And full disclosure, he asked me to write the foreword. Ruben and I have known each other for a little while now. And I was honored to do so because this is a beautiful, systematic kind of breakdown of a lot of the questions I get from you guys, from your viewers. He covers quite well in this book. So I'll be excited to go through this with him. So as usual, I'm just going to let our guest do most of his self-introduction. So let's pull on from beautiful off the coast of Spain in a beautiful island called Menorca. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah, right. Ruben Gomez, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. So for those of you watching, I guess just a quick little background. Ruben and I crossed paths maybe, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe. But it was because of Hebrew Roots, and he had come across my book, I believe, and reached out to me, and we got on, I forgot where it was, Facebook or wherever, and had a video chat for a while and kind of shared what we're each experiencing. So it's really cool to meet another brother who's kind of in the same area of apologetics. And so, as I mentioned, he's written a book. But before we get into that, Ruben, tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background. Like, what led you to write this book and where you are today?
Sure. I'm a Spanish Baptist minister, and I have been for many, many years. But I've been translating academic Christian books and doing my own writing.
So he is a Baptist minister, which means he's not going to hold the same doctrines as many other people within Western Christianity do. I mean, it's going to be a very wide range. Even there are different types of Baptists that believe different things. And even within Western Christianity, they will call each other heretics. There's a lot of infighting. If you ever get on, a debatable subject or topic with Christianity with a lot of these other denominations, they will just go at it, right? So sometimes we often get complaints that within the Hebrew Roots movement, there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of debates, there's a lot of, uncharitable people. I have met a lot of uncharitable Christians with their doctrines, calling, each other heretics and so forth, calling me a heretic and everything. So let's be fair across the board when we're talking about this. There are charitable Christians, uncharitable Christians. There are charitable Hebrew Roots. There are uncharitable Hebrew Roots people.
Writing for the better part of the last 25 years. So that's what I do.
Okay.
I hold a master's degree from the University of Chester, a master's degree in theology. And my training and research lies mainly in the area of hermeneutics and Jewish-Christian relations.
Oh, great.
So apart from that, my wife of 39 years and I have 3 grown-up children and 1 grandchild. And we are expecting a second one next month, God willing.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great. We're not quite to the grandchildren stage yet. We've got our oldest is about to get married this year. So,
okay.
Beautiful time of life.
Yeah, great experience.
So, so how did you first come across Hebrew Roots? What was your first exposure to this theology?
Actually, it happened in a interesting kind of way. I was doing some research, in-depth research about the Messianic Jewish movement as part of my studies and so on. And I realized that there were many so-called Messianic Gentiles who worshipped in Messianic Jewish congregations,
Right.
or who had been a part of Messianic Jewish congregations at some point in their lives. I felt that was interesting, and so I wanted to know who were these people, why they identified as Israelites, and also what led them to conclude that we should, as believers, be keeping Torah. So once they piqued my interest, I guess I just decided to follow the rabbit trail and see where it led.
Your academic curiosity got the better of you.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So that's how it all started.
And in all fairness, I think that's what a lot of people need to do with Western Christianity. Find out where it began, find out where its roots are, because it's not first century. Within the first century, they were mainly Jews going to Sabbath, going to synagogue, teaching the Torah. The apostolic writings all show that the Torah was being taught to both the Jew and Gentile. And so when you do an honest and good study of where Western Christianity came from, it's going to be the middle of the 2nd century, I believe. All right, you're going to start with Justin Martyr. You're going to start somewhere around, after 135 or so, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, in the 130s, 150s, right around in there is where you're really seeing a break from Jewish believers in Yeshua and Gentile believers in Yeshua. A lot having to do with the revolt of the Bar Kokhba revolt, and of course, Emperor Hadrian outlawing Jewish law in the land of Israel. he actually changes the name of the land of Israel to Palestine, and he also changes the name of Jerusalem to Alia Capitolina in honor of Jupiter. So we are going to see a big break in what I believe to be a real strong formation of Western Christianity at that point. And it is going to start out with replacement theology. Anyone who's read the writings of Justin Martyr and so forth, which we'll see a couple quotes from him in a little bit, anti-Semitism has begun. And the replacement theology is really now coming forth and forming all the way to the time of the Nicene Council from the West. Not that everyone's doing it. You still have the Nazarenes and so forth that are following the ways of Torah, following Yeshua according to Torah and so forth. But you do have Western Christianity really, in a sense, becoming birthed, I think, personally. But you do your own research, like I said.
That's very interesting. I came at it through a friend, but I had, I think, the equal experience of, wait, this is really curious and interesting. What's going on here? And I wanted to kind of lean in.
Yes.
So in your part of the world, in Europe, what is the state of Hebrew roots? What are you seeing? Is it very active? Is it well known?
It is, because with the advent of the internet and social media, it has become a global phenomenon. So it doesn't really matter where you live. You've probably encountered or will encounter at some point the Hebrew roots movement in one way, shape, or form.
Sure.
So I would say that probably you have more groups under the umbrella of what we would call the Hebrew roots movement, Torahism, Torah observant Christians, or whatever.
Sure.
But I would say that in the American continent, it is probably more widespread. But it is also well known in Europe. And as I said, being a globalized world, no matter where you are, you will encounter that phenomenon. And
Right.
that's basically, what also drove me to write about Hebrew roots. It's
So again, it's not monolithic. That's the key here. So keep in mind that there are so many different beliefs within each Hebrew root group, okay, that might not line up with the next group or the next group. Same thing with Christianity. Christianity has far more, hundreds, if not thousands, of divisions within different sects of Christianity. It's no different with Hebrew roots. It's no different with Judaism. It's Judaisms. There is no monolithic Judaism. There wasn't one in the first century. The communities all had variations in different ways they expressed keeping the Torah, and they didn't all agree with one another, and they all didn't get along either at times. So Christianity has not gotten along, different sects of Christianity, with one another throughout time, Otherwise, Martin Luther wouldn't have had to hide for his life when he nailed the 95th Theses onto the door. He could have walked around and said, hey, let's talk about this. Let's discuss this, and wouldn't have had to worry about his life being threatened. But it was. So the history of Christianity is also very bloody, very bloody. But let's go ahead and continue.
Growth, its challenges, the challenges it poses on traditional so-called Christianity.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I mentioned to you off air that I have had many conversations with pastors who will reach out and want to chat on the phone because they're unaware of this movement until it kind of rises up in their church, and either people are leaving the church or challenging them, or getting really curious about this. Have you seen it infiltrate or affect the church
Well,
in Spain?
in Spain, where I live, there's one of the.
So what does he mean by the church in Spain? Is there just one monolithic church in Spain? They're not all the same exact beliefs in Spain.
Largest denominations, evangelical denominations, is ethnically gypsy. We call it the gypsy church. Philadelphia is the actually the name, and for some reason they are the ones who have come under a lot of pressure because many people from Hebrew roots have been trying to pull them away from their churches. So I would say that's the only denomination as such that has been greatly affected here in Spain. Others may have occasionally come across some influences, but not in a general kind of way.
So that's super interesting. Is there a connection in the Gypsy Church with the concept of the lost tribes of Israel? That kind of a thing?
Indeed, yes, that's the whole point. As you well know, British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism is not only something that we find in Britain or Northern Europe or the United States, for instance. It is also something that, in different ways, you can find among other peoples in the people's groups in the.
Okay, so that is basically a two-house theology, kind of like what I was saying earlier, that there are, what we call British Israelism or so forth, or so on, that, they believe that they're actually part of the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes and everything. That's not something that I hold to. I know many people that don't hold to that are in the Messianic movement. I am a Gentile. I'm not ethnically Jewish. I am not one that believes that the tribes are lost. They weren't lost in the first century. All 12 tribes were there. And I do have a video where I walk you through that. So I don't hold that the tribes are still lost. There is, if you see in the nation of Israel right now, there are remnants, I believe, of all 12 tribes there. And they've always been together. So, not to get off on a tangent where I can explain that more. I do have a video where I do that, but no, I am not part of that aspect of what you would call Hebrew roots or Messianic Judaism or however title you want it, people of the way. No, so we don't all hold to that two-house theology that these guys are touching on. We would not agree with that doctrine.
World. And because of the very interesting origin and also not very understudied, let's say it that way, understudied origin of the gypsies, of the gypsy community, many of them feel very much at home with the idea that they might also be part of the lost tribes of Israel,
right?
Which is something I'm sure we'll talk about, and I guess that's the reason behind it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we have the Hebrew Israelites here in America.
Yes,
sometimes Black Hebrew Israelites, but it's also a sort of a racial identity, similar to what you're describing. Yeah.
Yes, I think that probably explains at least part of it.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And then there's just sort of this global, I don't even know what I want to call it. I don't know if conspiracy theory is the right word, but there's this questioning of authority, and which is, that's okay. But there's these theories that get introduced, and you cover some of that here, the theologically that get introduced, but also there's historical sort of conspiracy theories, I'll call them. I'll call them unsubstantiated claims of history. About this or that, about the separating of the Jews and the Gentiles, and what happened were the 10 tribes really lost and all that. And so where we have...
So again, I don't believe the 10 tribes were actually ever really lost. Large number of them just absorbed into Judea, into the southern kingdom. All right. And there's evidence of that throughout time that they did that. They were there when the exile came to going back to, being exiled to Babylon. All 12 tribes were exiled to Babylon, and so forth. So, what's the origins of Christianity? Where does it get its authority and so forth? That is always in question, and people have, different thoughts and ideas, right? Peter being the first pope, and that's where the authority, and they try to make this chain go all the way back to Peter. Not everyone agrees on that. So where are these guys getting their church authority from? How far back does that authority go to? Well, I guarantee you they're going to try and make it go back to the apostles, right? And they're going to think their way of chain of Christianity started with the apostles and they carried it on, and it goes all the way through Western Christianity all the way to them today. That's what they're going to think, right? And I'm going to say, no, you abandoned the teachings of the apostles. Your sect of Christianity doesn't go all the way back to the apostles. And so I would challenge their historical history. All right. Every sect of Christianity believes they can make a chain all the way back to the apostles. Okay. And I believe, no, they taught Torah. They taught keeping Sabbath. There are certain points along the way where Western Christianity abandoned the truth of Scripture. Okay. Not all of the truth of Scripture, but many commands of Scripture that we're supposed to still be keeping, they abandoned and changed it and had their excuses for it. So, and I'm sure, it wouldn't be hard to do that. It wouldn't be hard to show you that. But let's go ahead and continue.
Holes in our knowledge historically, they will be filled sometimes with people that want to fill them with sort of interesting theories about things that
most people I find that are very gullible. They want they want to believe, and they when they find something, even if it's not substantiated, they so much want to believe in something that they fall for it. And
that's what I say these guys did with Western Christianity. They so much want to believe they don't have to follow the Torah that they are looking for ways in the Scripture to see it from their lens, from their perspective. And it cannot be substantiated with proper exegesis. That's my pushback on them. And of course, they're going to push back on me saying I'm not doing proper exegesis, right? And that's for you guys to decide. But I'm going to have the same arguments. They're wanting not to follow Torah. They don't want to follow the Sabbath. They're not doing proper exegesis, keeping kosher and so forth. Yeshua tore down the middle wall of partition. The proper exegesis of that is the oral traditions of Judaism, so that the Jew and Gentile can worship together. Because within the first century, Judaizing, the definition of Judaizing was you needed to become a Jew to be saved, to become a full covenant member, which included a proselytized system invented by the different sects of Judaism. And they pushed it on the Gentiles. They made walls of division, making it hard for a Gentile to come into the kingdom. That's not the Torah. That's not Yeshua. That's oral tradition. Okay. And that's the walls of partition that are torn down. Western Christianity has built its own walls back up. Okay. Orthodox Judaism built its walls back up again to divide between the Jew and the Gentile.
They feel that they have not been taken care of. They feel that traditional ways of expressing their faith have failed them.
That's because we can prove they don't date all the way back to the first century. They don't date back to the apostles. That's what we mean by they have failed. These are later inventions, the traditions that he holds to of Western Christianity and that Rob holds to, where many of their beliefs, not all their beliefs, many of their beliefs don't date back to the first century.
Many of them would say, the church has lied to us. The church has hidden so many.
The church has covered up things. Absolutely. All right. You've got the Roman Empire with Constantine and then the following emperors after him instituting Christianity into the empire. There's a lot of blood on their hands because there was a lot of anti-Semitism. Amen. And you could be thrown in jail and killed if you were caught doing Judaism. That's not lovingly showing you the truth. That's what Western Christianity has in its background, a lot of blood on its hand and a lot of hiding. It does. It's a fact. It's a fact of history.
Many things from
I've heard that, yeah.
And all of that really is the soil where all sorts of conspiracy theories can grow and grow, very, very rapidly.
Right.
So
Yeah.
one of my conclusions in the book is that really one way to explain the Hebrew roots movement is to say that it's a grand conspiracy theory, or to put it in another way, it's a string of different conspiracy theories.
Right.
Like the scribes who put down the Hebrew text, knowingly hid the name of the Lord so that we would not know what it was and we would not pronounce it. The church has hidden the Hebrew, what they say are the Hebrew original manuscripts that are
Right.
nowhere to be found, of course. But again, the conspiracy.
And again, not all. There are Hebrew rooters that believe all of this, but they're not all. It's not a sweep. You can't make a full inclusion of all. Okay. So that would be just like me saying Christianity believes in transubstantiation. Look at that. Look at that doctrine. Is that what these guys hold to? I don't think they do. If he's Baptist, he doesn't, and I don't think Rob does. But if I start putting that label on them, they're not going to want to be connected to them because that's not a doctrine they would hold to. They don't, I doubt very highly they pray to Mary as their intermediary between them and Jesus, Yeshua, right? I doubt they do that. And they put that doctrine on them and label them. That's what Christians do. And they don't do that. They're going to push back on it. Okay. And so do many within Messianic Judaism, Hebrew roots, whatever name you want to call us. Okay. We don't all believe the same.
They did it on purpose. They burned all the manuscripts so that we only have Greek manuscripts.
Yeah.
So and on and on and on. So it's a.
Now, we do know that Western Christianity burned down synagogues at times, certain times, time periods, yet certain areas, not all of Western Christianity, but certain times, there was the burning down of synagogues, killing Jews, persecuting Jews, burning their Torah scrolls, burning the Talmud, and so forth, trying to get rid of all evidence of the existence of an Israelite, of a Jew. This is history within Western Christianity also.
String of things that really are linked and have in common the fact that they are conspiracy theories.
Right. And it's exactly right. I mean, like you mentioned, we don't have the Hebrew manuscripts. So that lack of knowledge about where they are becomes this hole that they can fill with their theories. I actually have.
I have studied from Hebrew scholars that come from the Baptist background. We got Dr. Robert Lindsay, who was a good friend of Dr. David Flusser in Israel. They believe that they can go back to the original Hebrew, that the Greek was copied from a Hebrew, had Hebrew influence. A Hebrew gospel did exist at one time, though we have no physical evidence of it. They would claim that you could go into the Greek and translate especially like the book of Mark, back into Hebrew in many places, and it would be perfect Hebrew and so forth. So this is not some type of conspiracy theory. We've got solid scholars that have done the research and do believe with all their heart that there was a Hebrew gospel that we don't have physical evidence of. Now, they don't say that the Catholic Church burned the originals and all of that stuff, but there are scholars, credible scholars that do believe that. Now, I don't get into all that. The Greek is fine for me. All right. The Aramaic, the Greek, all of that is fine for me. We have the gospel message. We have the truth. I am not going to get into semantics about whether or not there was an original Hebrew gospel and you guys hit it all. That's not an argument for me. That's not a fight for me.
A quote that I posted on my YouTube channel from this book. You said this: ultimately, the Hebrew roots movement is a great conspiracy theory that is difficult to counter through the simple exposition of facts.
Right.
Thought that was a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And I've seen the same thing. So,
I mean, yeah. How can you face a conspiracy theory?
right.
We don't really know. I mean, because even if the plain truth is shown to somebody.
See, they love using that buzzword conspiracy theory because it sends an emotional message. It sends this emotional message, and they want to try and make it seem like it's the dominant view of these people, right? That often happens. Every one of us have been guilty of that when we're trying to drive home a point or a message or whatever. So please be careful of that, right? I know many, many people that are not holding to a lot of what these guys are trying to say that the Hebrew roots movement holds to. There are people that hold to it. There are probably some large numbers of people that hold to some of the things that these guys are going to be talking about, but it is not everybody, okay? Because it's not monolithic. Neither is Christianity.
Who wants to believe otherwise, yeah, they will resist any proof, any truth, and they will stay where they are. That's why it's so difficult to deal with some of the things that people in the Hebrew roots movement say or claim. And
Right.
not only difficult because I mean you can make a case against some of the nonsense that we read about and hear on social media, but at the end of the day, I mean, nothing changes because they will remain
Right.
unconvinced, and they will say that you've been brainwashed, and we've been there, done that. So
Right.
what
I
can
used
you
to think
tell
that
us that
too,
we
they'll say.
don't know? What can you
And
tell us that we don't know already?
right, exactly. And of course, when it's a conspiracy theory, then anything can be folded into it. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, here's an interesting question now. So you and I are agreed on that there is a conspiratorial element,
Hmm.
but the folks who are in it, who are believing it from the inside, wouldn't call it that. They would call it newfound knowledge, or they would have a positive way to express.
So could I use conspiracy theory when it comes to Peter being the first pope, and there's this long chain succession of popes, that the first pope was Peter, and that, um, that we have, all of these doctrines that come out of the Catholic Church and everything. Could I try and put in a conspiracy spin on that? Sure, I could. Sure, I could. It's that buzzword, conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. You know what I mean? That is meant to send an emotion. So please be careful of that.
That.
Yes.
How do you? I don't know how much you've interviewed or talked to folks with this, but how would you describe, or how would you, how do you try to pull the veil off and say, these things just aren't factual, or do you think there's a way to take trail of facts to the truth that might help lead them out?
Well, to tell you the truth, I think for many people it is impossible to hold any kind of conversation with many of the supporters of the adherents of Hebrew roots. It just isn't possible to make a logical case, and that we can, both parties can agree on what truth is, on the law of non-contradiction, and things like that, which are so basic in science and in humanities. You just cannot approach Hebrew roots this way because they are just.
Many people say that about Christianity. You can't come to an agreement on them. You can't, they are stuck in their ways. And they, some people say, oh, they've been brainwashed, but the lies and the things hidden and so forth. And there has been a lot of lies and hidden things, right? Within Western Christianity to get you to believe what you believe. Otherwise, you would not even have the Reformation the way it was done, right? That was bringing out a huge lie, what Luther did about, that grace, that, the fact that we are saved by grace and not by works, right? And then the Catholic Church is saying, no, you're saved by works and so forth. This was a huge Reformation moment in history. They were spinning conspiracy theories. They were spinning lies to their people. It wasn't scriptural. That's the bottom line, is what is scriptural. And we should be able to debate over those things. We should wrestle with what is scriptural, what is the context, what is exegesis, and so forth. Yes, some people can't do it charitably. Some people can.
So closed in their in-house, they don't really. One of the problems with Hebrew roots is that it resembles, in some ways, many of the cults that we usually know. Not only recent cults, but even earlier cults. Uh, I I hesitate when I'm asked, are Hebrew roots a cult? Well, I don't think Hebrew roots as such is a cult, but I do believe there are very many cultic or cultish attitudes among Hebrew
You can find the same in Western Christianity. Same thing. It's an attitude, right? It's a perspective.
rooters, if I may use that word.
Yeah, I've come to the same conclusion. I don't want to label it a cult. I don't know that it has all the markings,
Yeah.
but there are some things there that are really questionable.
Yes.
I get messages a lot, for example, from women whose husbands are in it,
Yes.
and it starts bordering on cult, even spiritual abuse,
Yes. Yes.
where the spouse is forcing or trying to have power and control over somebody else based on the word of God.
The the Western Christian church is full of that throughout history with the popes and the Church of England and all kind. I mean, that has been prevalent throughout Christianity, all throughout its history. It's had issues with that. Again, not everybody, but it has the same issues as within the Hebrew roots, right? The Hebrew root, it's not going to, um, each side is not going to have its problems in those areas. That's the bottom line.
And
Which is just
there are
heinous.
there are so many examples, of course. And in the book, I talk about the jargon. I mean, all cults have
Yep.
their own jargon. Only members of the cult really understand what it's meant by certain code words.
Hmm.
We have they cut ties with everybody else from the outside, so that they are not
Yes.
exposed to evil, to anything out there which may harm us and goes against.
We know that Western Christianity has had a history of making laws that would excommunicate anyone that didn't believe the way they did, right? And again, during the time of Constantine and the following emperors after him made laws where you could be thrown in jail and killed if you didn't hold to certain doctrines. We see that throughout all kinds of different denominations of Western Christianity, how they would excommunicate and burn people who thought they thought they were witches and everything. It was just Western Christianity has a lot of blood on its hands. A lot of blood on its hands.
Us. They have this sense of being the victims, the victims
Very much.
of fraud, religious fraud, and traditions of man. I mean, church history for them is something they very much talk against.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, we show you where in Western Christianity replacement theology began, where a lot of wrong things happened. It's just a fact of history. We don't, at least I don't, put some type of blanket statement that all Western Christians are not saved, right? And I know these guys don't try to put a blanket statement that all people in the Hebrew roots movement are not saved, right? We're all just expressing our concerns on both sides. And there is plenty of concerns on the Western Christian side with it. But see, again, when I say Western Christianity, you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of denominations. So it's, you can't even trying to make that statement again. It's, the blanket statement thing. There's going to be people that are going to push back on me and say, well, I don't believe that, Tony. Well, I don't believe that. Why are you included me in on that? So there's going to be pushback on both sides. So I really don't see this discussion so far as being very fruitful. I don't. Not Unless you start interviewing people who are on both sides of the fence and they both can share their explanations and so forth. But I don't find this one to be very fruitful. There's a lot of broad, sweeping remarks here that don't include everybody.
Yeah, in a very real sense, they're rebuilding the dividing wall of hostility that Christ broke down.
See, again, he's not doing proper exegesis, in my opinion. The wall that was torn down was the oral traditions of the Judaisms of the day that violated the Torah. This is what Yeshua tore down so the Gentile could come in. What did a lot of Western Christianity, especially when you get into the middle of the 2nd century going forward, they start building up walls, right? And different sects of the Christianity there, different assemblies, they start replacement theology, building up walls that Yeshua tore down. And that's the foundation from which these men get their doctrines. That's the foundation from which it goes back to these men, Justin Martyr and so forth.
As Paul says in Ephesians 2, they're kind of reconstructing that. It's frustrating.
That's one way to put it, certainly. But also, I think that one of the problems is that when you go to the extremes, you're bound to get into trouble. I mean,
right.
One of the things that I did in my studies is to research one of the extremes within Christianity would be with regards to Judaism, would be what the so-called replacement theology, supersessionism, erasing the Jews from God's plan of salvation today. I mean, they had a place in the Old Testament, in the old times, but now that Jesus, the Messiah, has come, they have no purpose, no theological relevance. That's
actually, from my understanding, the dominant, if we just get into numbers, the dominant view is replacement theology in Western Christianity. When you begin to look at all the different sects of Western Christianity, or you try to get into what is the doctrines of these different denominations, there are more that hold to the doctrine of supersessionism and replacement theology in Western Christianity than don't. Go ahead and do your research. See if I'm not true. I mean, one of the largest, obviously, sects of Christianity is the Roman Catholic Church. And then when you combine it with the Lutherans and so forth, these large, huge denominations, a lot of them hold to replacement theology, which is a false teaching. But they can date it all the way back down there to the 2nd century there, down to Justin Martyr and so forth. So, yeah, it's the dominant view of Western Christianity. Now, again, it's not the total view. I know Rob claims not to be a replacement theology person. I don't know about this gentleman here, whether he does or doesn't, but yeah.
That would be one extreme. Now, Hebrew Roots goes, in my view, to the opposite extreme, which is equally dangerous. They say, oh, the church has preached and replacement theology. There's so much anti-Judaism, theological anti-Judaism in Christianity, throughout the ages. And we don't want that. We don't want that. But what they do is, by declaring themselves to be Israelites, to be Israel, in fact, they are falling into the same trap as replacement theology.
And I would agree with that. That's why I am not a two-house theology person. When they go to the extreme on that end to try and say, hey, we are Israelites, somehow or way we have Israelite blood, we're the lost tribes and all of that, they do take it so far as to almost to say that you must be an Israelite to be saved. You must do it this way to be saved, right? And so there is that extreme swing. Totally agree with that. I'm on board with that. That's why I don't hold to that.
Absolutely.
So that, we are just like them. They are like us. We are one. We are Israel. And therefore, the Jewish people as such have, again, no particular interest or relevance theologically in the eyes of God and so on. So,
yeah. Very true.
It's a battle of extremes, and that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. But they don't
Yeah, I agree.
realize, and this kind of reverse replacement theology, for want of a better word, this reverse replacement theology is also doing a lot of harm. So they
Hmm.
accuse the Christian church of replacing the Jews, of not of doing away with the Old Testament, of not wanting to have anything to do with the Jewish people, and at the same time they're doing the same thing, only on the
Right.
other side of things.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree. You got to admit, Western Christianity has done that, right? They have a much larger group of replacement theologists and people who believe they are, I mean, Israel is replaced. Israel, the covenants and that are done. They're done away with. They've ended. Okay. And that's much larger than what the Hebrew roots, if we were to get into numbers and stuff. But yeah, there are Hebrew roots, assemblies or congregations or denominations, however you want to, that do. They swing the pendulum the other way too far. Totally agree on that. And I am not associated with those groups. I do not believe that they are correct. Okay. It doesn't mean that everything they say is incorrect. Everything they teach is incorrect. There are parts of their theology that is incorrect. Okay. I believe in the deity of Yeshua. So when it comes to the Catholic Church or Lutheran or however you want, they believe in the deity of Yeshua. So I could quote some things out of different denominations of Western Christianity that hold to the doctrine of the deity of Yeshua, and I would be in agreement with that, right? And I would use that. There would be some solid arguments there that would hold to the deity of Yeshua, and I could use that. I would have no problem with that. But yeah, it's coming from a Western Christian theologian or, scholar or whatever. Oh, well, he's speaking a truth, right? And same thing with the Hebrew roots. If they're speaking a truth about something, quoting them on that truth, hey, that's fine. We're looking at the truth of what is being spoken. All right. But again, be careful of the blanket statements.
And like you said, I don't think they fully realize that. In
No.
fact, I think that's a good spot to jump into your book. So the book is called The Hebrew Roots Movement. I'll be honest, Ruben, I think I like the Spanish title better. What was called something, The Bitter Fruit?
Yes, it was a longer title. It was called the Bitter Fruits of the Hebrew Roots Movement.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love that. I thought that's great.
yeah, because of course, I mean, the Lord.
We can write a book calling it The Bitter Fruit of Western Christianity. Talk about replacement theology, talk about, transubstantiation, all kind, the doctrine of original sin, PSA, penal substitution, uh, you know, a lot of these doctrines that are man-made that weren't there in the first century, that came much, much later. That a lot of the beliefs that R.L. Solberg and Ruben here hold to don't go back to the first century. They were invented. They're man doctrines, invented much, much later. We could call it the bitter fruit of Western Christianity.
Our Lord said that you are to judge a tree by its fruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree with that. Amen. Judge a tree by its fruit.
if we have a movement like the Hebrew Roots movement and we look at the fruits it's bearing, those fruits are horrible. I mean,
Bitter, yeah.
division, bitter in all.
I can sit here and put down Western Christianity, the excess Pentecostalism and the Kenneth Copelands and the Jesse Duplantis and the Creflo Dollars. And, I could just start name dropping people, with all these different movements, Bethel Church, all these extreme Pentecostal faith groups that these guys here probably wouldn't agree with on a lot of what they're doing. I can make these sweeping remarks again, like the Catholic Church, the Lutheran Church, the doctrines and this and that. I mean, we could just start mudslinging back and forth with each other. Western Christianity has just as much. They have good fruit, they have bad fruit. The Messianic movement has good fruit. It has bad fruit. Okay. You do judge a tree by its fruit. Absolutely. Absolutely. But you got to be careful about broad sweeping remarks.
In all ways. There's
Absolutely.
division, there's criticism, backbiting, belittling brothers and sisters in the Lord.
Yeah.
Same in Western Christianity. Same thing. I've seen it, watched it. Same thing.
All sorts of things, and
And I'll
abuse, as you
say
said.
the fruit of the Hebrew roots movement, I think, is one of the major indicators for people outside to know that something's wrong.
Mm.
And in all fairness, I have to say I have talked to, in the last maybe year or two, what I would call some reasonable Hebrew roots folks, where they're willing to have a friendly disagreement, and they'll acknowledge to some degree or another that this is not a salvific issue. Although I do believe it ties directly to that. But so
I say the same thing, RL. I say the same thing. There are a few Western Christians that I can sit down and talk to and not have things thrown at me and stuff like that. And we can probably agree on some things that aren't necessarily salvific or whatever, but it does come down to a lot of things. Only Yahweh can judge us. Only Yahweh, only Yeshua. He's going to be the final judge on that. And so when it comes down, we are all doing our best to keep people from false doctrine, to keep our assemblies and congregations and so forth on the narrow path and everything. So there's going to be a lot of disagreement going on, and we do have to do a certain amount of judging to protect the flock, which both sides are trying to do, and we're not going to agree. Correct. There are definitely some warnings that I do about Western Christianity, certain doctrines, certain teachings that are very dangerous. And if someone jumps into that and pushes that to its extreme, I do believe you can lose your salvation. Okay. I don't believe in once saved, always saved. And so there are man-made doctrines when taken to an extreme, or, taken, if it's a false man-made doctrine, it can be dangerous. So a person could lose their salvation depending on what the topic is, what the doctrine is. We'd have to talk about it.
Just for our viewers, with the broad brushstroke we're painting, many of you who watch this are very familiar with this kind of behavior and those kinds of bitter fruits. And so I just kind of wanted to put that caveat out there that there are some genuinely kind folks in this arena, but in all honesty, in all candor, they're the minority.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
I say with Western Christianity too, there's a minority group that I'll be polite and kind and not shun you and not ostracize you or call you a heretic or whatever. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And so here's one thing I think is super interesting. And you did such a terrific job. You dove much deeper than I did into the roots of the Hebrew roots. So again, you guys, the book is called The Hebrew Roots Movement, A Critical Analysis of Its Origins, Teachings, and Biblical Interpretations. And Ruben just did a fantastic systematic job. So I wanted to chat a little bit about the forerunners of the Hebrew Roots Movement. You got a whole section on that, talking about the Worldwide Church of God, the Sacred Name Movement. My opinion is that most folks in Hebrew Roots have no clue about the forerunners of the historical, more recent historical movement that began the calling that they're in, or the movement that they're in.
Right.
So can you kind of speak to that a little bit? That kind of the recent historical shift.
Sure. Just if I may, I just wanted to mention one thing about the reasons, the motivation behind the book. And that explains why I changed the title of the book. Even the content has changed a little bit, and of course it's an expanded edition as well, so it's got more material than the original version. But anyway, the subtitle of the book explains the three different points, or the different points that I'm trying to make as the basis of my research for the book. So first of all, I had a hermeneutical interest, that is interpretation.
Yeah, you got a beautiful section on that too.
that from a hermeneutical point of view, I was interested in discovering how you can misinterpret the text of Scripture so blatantly, and at the same time get away with it. I mean, that
I've been wondering about that with Western Christianity for a long time, but when they pound it and they get to control the government, they are the world empire of the day, then they drive the force of doctrine, then it gets driven into people, right? So, looking at the Roman Empire with Constantine and forward with the other emperors, they drove it home. When you get to England and King James and so forth, I mean, these people would drive home their doctrines into you, and it was the law of the land. Whether you liked it or not, whether it was a true doctrine or not, if it benefited them financially, and again, there's a lot of blood on their hands for what has happened. All right. And why did Martin Luther fear for his life, right? He wanted to just have an open debate. He just wanted to have a discussion. A Catholic monk wanted to have a discussion, pushing back on the power structure of the day. Well, why do you think Yeshua was put to death? They didn't want to discuss. They didn't want to have a good old honest debate and discussion. No, they looked at Yeshua as a threat to their power structure. That's what has happened throughout time in many eras of Western Christianity, right? Depending on what sect you're talking about, what group you're talking about, and so forth. It's even happened here in America, okay, with the Puritans and so forth. They take it upon themselves to go ahead and institute the death penalty on things and people, and it just gets driven into you. That doctrine gets driven into you. How do you get away with it? You force it. You force it, right? And if you don't want to be a part of it, we're either going to throw you in jail, kill you, or excommunicate you and get you out. Everyone else is, going to go ahead and absorb the doctrine, right? So this is why myself, and I keep telling others, study to show yourself approved. Study the scriptures yourself. Make sure you're not just swallowing what people are telling you.
That to me was fascinating. I mean,
Sure.
how can the parable of the prodigal son be so misinterpreted in the Hebrew roots movement, for example?
There's an agenda, right? So the parable of the lost son, right? There's two sons there. One stays, one becomes lost. I get it. A lot of people in the Hebrew roots movement, there are certain sects of the Hebrew roots movement that will take that as the two houses of Israel, the lost house, and of course the southern kingdom. One is the northern kingdom. And of course, the northern kingdom is the lost son coming back. And so they make this parable all about the two house theology. Yep, I get it. I get it. But people will fall for it. That's fine. It's going to happen, right? Just like people fell for replacement theology, you wonder, how in the world did you ever fall for replacement theology? How in the world do you ever think that the church has replaced Israel? People will fall for it. There's just as much on the side of Western Christianity that we can go to as on the side of the Hebrew roots. We can point the fingers both ways.
Example, how can Acts 15:21 within the context of the Jerusalem Council be so misinterpreted as they want to say something that the text doesn't say. In fact, they want to say the opposite to what the text says.
And that's what I say Ruben Gomez does. He says something the opposite of what the text says, because they don't understand the oral traditions of the day. They don't understand the context. So it goes both ways. I cannot believe that Western Christianity has interpreted Acts 15 so blatantly wrong. And when I say Western Christianity, anyone who holds that the Torah is not applicable to our lives today for Gentiles, how did you miss Acts 15? Because it blatantly says, no, we're not going to force Gentiles to convert to becoming a Jew through a proselytized system of the customs of Moses, the oral tradition. But yes, they are going to follow the Torah. Yes, we're going to give them the 4 categories, all right, for ritual purity. So when they come to our congregations, when they come, they are not contaminating us with their old pagan ways. It's all about paganism there. Those first four categories, it's all about paganism, coming out of paganism. And then what? Moshe is read aloud since ancient times in the synagogues. This is a pro-synagogue stance. Of course, they're thinking, yes, the Gentiles are going to, there is no more walls of partition. And what are the congregations modeled after? The synagogue. Amen. Synagogue life and the Torah. This is Acts 15. These are all Jews. They're not anti-Torah people. They're not anti-Shabbat people. Are you really thinking they're going to say, yes, Gentiles, you go do your thing on Sunday morning. We'll do our thing on Shabbat. Oh, and we won't build up walls. That's building up a wall right there. No, they're going to come together on Shabbat and learn the Torah together because the walls of partition have been torn down. The oral traditions have been torn down. So yeah, I mean, Ruben, you fell for the lie. You fell for the eisegesis. That's what I would say. And you would say that about me too. You're wondering, how did I fall for a blatant misinterpretation? I didn't. I would accuse you of doing that, in all due respect, not trying to be mean or anything, but that's just, for me, that's my perspective.
So I had a hermeneutical interest, but I also had a pastoral perspective, being a pastor myself.
Sure.
And I realized that something had to be done. And apart from a few chosen titles, there wasn't much literature to counter the errors of the Hebrew roots movement. And we all know that a growing number of Christians are being disturbed by their teachings worldwide, not only in a
Many of us are disturbed by the Western Christian teachings. It goes both ways.
certain part of the world, which is a major concern. So that was the pastoral perspective. And thirdly, the theological approach. I wanted to show what I just said before, but I think that gives a context to the answer. I wanted to show how the two extremes of replacement theology on the one side and Hebrew roots on the other result in the same thing, the cancellation. Now that we talk so much about canceling people in our culture, the cancellation of the uniqueness of the Jewish people, the uniqueness of their election, the uniqueness of their calling, and so on and so forth. And in particular, because I found, and I do believe this, very much, that Hebrew roots undermines the very existence of Messianic Jews. And that to me is a grave problem.
Yes, I
Because
agree.
I do believe in the place and the ministry of true Messianic Jews, and how they.
Yeah, and you have a section on that, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah, where you're kind of
So I
addressing the
wanted,
differences.
in other words, that talks about interpretation, the title, the origins.
Western Christianity does the same thing with its replacement theology. It threatens the Messianic Jews, for Jews to be able to live as Jews. That was under a threat early on, right? Starting from the middle of the 2nd century. It was a threat that the Jews could no longer live as Jews if you were going to be a believer in Yeshua. Starting in the middle of the 2nd century, if you were within that Western Christian stream there, heading towards Constantine and beyond, replacement theology was just getting built. That's the history of these guys' doctrine. That's where the history of these guys' doctrine goes back to the middle 2nd century, not the 1st century. And so their foundational history is built on replacement theology. Thank goodness, many of the doctrines in men and their history broke away from that theology. It's seeming more and more. I mean, Rob says he's not a replacement theologist, though that's where the history of his Christianity goes back to. It ultimately goes back to that. Same with Ruben Gomez, as far as I can tell, because it doesn't go back to the 1st century. But let's continue.
The interpretation, the theological arguments. and therefore that was my main thrust when I decided to publish the book. So sorry for taking you on a tangent a little bit.
Oh, not at all. No, I think that's very interesting. I didn't actually catch that, but as you mentioned each part you
Yeah,
addressed, I'm like, oh yeah, I read about that. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
and to me, because Messianic Judaism.
All right, so let me just go ahead and show you some information when I'm talking about replacement theology and why these guys' historical chain of where their doctrines and where their branch of Christianity comes from. I call it Western Christianity, but it does funnel down. It's a wide, wide thing right now with hundreds, if not thousands of denominations, but it will funnel down to right around the time of Justin Martyr is my opinion. So let me kind of show you a little bit of what I mean by that. All right, so a few of these slides are from my teaching about, because I've been challenged sometimes that my theology goes against 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy is what some people will try and tell me. And I'll say, no, your 2,000 years of Christian orthodoxy is not 2,000 years. It might be 1,900 years, but it doesn't go back to the first century. And so I did do a video showing why I believe the way I do. That today's Christian orthodoxy within Western Christianity does not go back to the first century. So I have here one of the first places one sees the ideas of replacement theology is around 155 CE between a Gentile, Justin Martyr, and a Jew named Trypho. Justin tried to convert Trypho to his type of Christianity. He had a specific type. Remember, it's not monolithic at this time, but his type of Christianity. Justin Martyr is now believing in replacement theology. Okay. It says in this debate, Justin says the true spiritual Israel and descendants of Judah, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham are we who have been led to God through this crucified Christ. Okay. He's a Gentile. All right. And so this is a replacement of Israel comment here. And then it goes on. Justin Martyr also says, we who have been quarried out from the bowels of Christ are the true Israelite race. Okay. Justin Martyr is anti-Semitic. This is where you really get a lot of Western Christianity. Okay. It kind of really comes from this point forward. Right. And basically, I say really after the Bar Kokhba revolt, like I said earlier, I don't want to repeat everything that I said there, but there is this big breakaway beginning to happen with the Jewish roots of your faith, we would call it, going to synagogue and so forth. Gentiles are really breaking away from that at this point in the West, in Rome, over there in Antioch and so forth. They are breaking away from the Hebrew roots of their faith is what we would call it, right? So this is what I believe R.L. Solberg and Ruben, they go back to Gomez here. And so then we have the Epistle of Barnabas written somewhere between 80 and 120 CE, which says, take heed now to yourselves and not to be like some, adding largely to your sins and saying the covenant is both theirs and ours, but they thus finally lost it. Meaning Israel, right? So the idea of replacement theology, the kind of birthing of it, the kind of, beginning stages of it, I think it's why Paul wrote the book of Romans, all right? Trying to show them in chapters 9 through 11 that Israel has not been forsaken. They've stumbled but not fallen and so forth. But eventually, by the time we get to the 130s and 150s, after that Bar Kokhba revolt, it's going to begin to now flourish. It's going to begin to really take root and show its poison fruit as it continues down to Constantine. Okay. So Irenaeus wrote around 180 CE, they who boast themselves as being the house of Jacob and the people of Israel are disinherited from the grace of God. This is replacement theology. Origen 250 CE speaks on Matthew 15:24 and Yeshua's statement pertaining to how he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Origen states the lost sheep are not Jews who are carnal Israel, but Christians who are heavenly Israel. He really didn't come for the Jews. He only came for the Christians, meaning Gentiles. Okay. And then we have John Chrysostom, preached in 387 CE in Rome. It is because you killed Christ. Okay, he's blaming everything on the Jews. It is because you shed the precious blood that there is now no restoration, no mercy anymore, and no defense. You have committed the ultimate transgression. This is why you are being punished worse now than in the past. If this were not the case, God would not have turned his back on you so completely. All right. And let me take you to some other information about Constantine. All right, so we have an article on Constantine and the foundations of anti-Semitism. I'll leave the link in the description box to this article so you can read it for yourself. But we want to come down here. So one of the first places people will sometimes take you is Ignatius, which he was not speaking against Jewish practice, but he was speaking against Judaizing. So it says, how long? This is in Magnesian. It was a letter to the Magnesians. And Ignatius says, how long? However, not long after the Apostle John died, around 99 AD, Ignatius of Antioch, 140 to 117, told his followers, it is absurd to profess Christ Jesus, Messiah Yeshua, and to Judaize, practice Jewish laws and customs. What does he mean by that? What does Judaizing mean? Converting to be a Jew. Okay, you cannot add to the work of Yeshua. So Judaizing in the first century wasn't just following the law of Moshe, it was converting to being a Jew. This is what Ignatius is against, and he is often misunderstood when you read his letters, right? There is no problem with following Jewish law. It's Judaizing. Okay. And now we got to get the proper definition. And that proper definition is the same one Paul had, where you convert to become a Jew to be saved. That's not just following the Torah. That's a proselytized system. That's a sectarian system that was developed and was around in the first century. Okay. And then, of course, here we got Justin Martyr again, where Justin wrote, the tribulations were justly imposed upon you, for you have murdered the just one, right? That anti-Semitism that's there with Justin Martyr. All right, so we go down to Constantine here. And of course, at first there was persecution on Christians, and now with the Edict of Milan, in 313, Constantine says, it has pleased us to remove all conditions whatsoever concerning the Christians, and now any one of these who wish to observe the Christian religion may do so freely and openly without any disturbance or molestation. Okay. And so at this time, there's going to be people going to Sabbath. There's going to be people who have abandoned the Sabbath. There's going to be people walking in Judaism. There's going to be Jewish believers, Gentile believers going to synagogue and so forth. And there's going to be ones that don't go, right? It's not monolithic, but now we got to get to what happens in 325 at the Nicene Council. Constantine wants everyone to be the same. He doesn't want all these differences out there. So what is he going to do? He's going to enforce what? His authority and power. He's going to bring this council together. They're going to render decisions. And within this time, this is where we're going to see laws made on how you are to celebrate the resurrection of Yeshua. This is where we get Easter from, right? And they're going to abandon by law Passover. They're going to make sure everyone can't do Passover. Okay, if you're a Gentile, you are going to be forbidden from doing Passover. So at the Council of Nicaea, Constantine read out the letter that he would subsequently send to churches everywhere. When the question arose concerning the most holy day of Easter, it was decreed by common consent to be expedient that this festival should be celebrated on the same day by all in every place. And truly, in the first place, it seemed to everyone a most unworthy thing that we should follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this most holy solemnity, who polluted wretches, have stained their hands with a nefarious crime are justly blinded in their minds. This is Constantine. This is anti-Semitism here. This is a doing away of a command of the Lord by a man-made doctrine and forcing it upon the Gentiles, forcing it upon you. This is the edict of the empire. It is fit, therefore, that rejecting the practice of this people, we should perpetuate to all future ages the celebration of this rite in a more legitimate order. Let us then have nothing in common with the most horrible rabbles of the Jews. Okay, this is the foundation of Rob and Ruben's doctrine. This is where it comes from. This is their foundation. Okay, so, he says, let us have nothing in common with the Jews. The reason why he's got to do all this is because people are still going to synagogue, celebrating Shabbat and so forth. The Nazarenes now have to move outside the Roman Empire. Otherwise, they will be threatened with persecution. But it doesn't stop them. They don't end. People who are following the Torah, following the Sabbath, will move out into safer areas. All right, so at the Council of Antioch in 345, Christians were banned from celebrating the Passover Seder with Jewish friends or neighbors. Then at the Council of Laodicea in 363 to 364, the biblical Sabbath day was outlawed. Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath. What do they mean by Judaizing? It's not the biblical definition. Okay, it means just doing anything of Jewish law, anything of the law of Moshe. They've changed the definition of Judaizing. It's not the biblical definition. And that's the way people are today. They anachronistically use the word Judaizer and take a definition that does not line up with the biblical definition of Judaizer. So Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day. Now they've created this thing called the Lord's Day, and they mean Sunday. They've created it. It's a man-made doctrine. If they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be cursed from Christ. Okay, so you can see it going right down the line. Anti-Semitism, replacement theology, being forced down your throat. This is the birthing of Western Christianity. Goes all the way back down to the late 130s, early in the 150s. You got Justin Martyr there, and so it starts right there in the mid 2nd century is where it really begins to sprout. Right, there is remnants of it prior to that. Like I said, I think that's why the book of Romans was written. Paul is coming against this seed of replacement theology that is coming forth there in the Roman assemblies there. But in the end, they don't heed Paul's words. They don't heed the book of Romans. They don't. They end up going full-blown into replacement theology by the middle of the 2nd century. This is where Mr. Gomez and R.L. Solberg's Christianity dates back to. All right, let's get back to the video.
Judaism is not only one of my areas of research, it is very close to my heart as well. I'm a Gentile, I'm not a Jew, and I do believe it is very, very important to distinguish between Messianic Judaism on the one hand and Hebrew roots, because Hebrew roots, its origins, and that will take us to the forerunners, the origins of Hebrew roots and the doctrine, the main tenets of a Hebrew roots movement are completely different to Messianic Judaism.
Right.
But unless you know that, and
some people will say Messianic Judaism has been all throughout time. There's always been Jews that were believers in Yeshua, so there's always been Messianic Judaism. There's always been Jews that have followed the Torah as best they could as followers of Yeshua, right? And throughout time, they would have been persecuted, even believing in Yeshua, but because they practice the law of Moshe, they would have been persecuted, right? And when we talk about Messianic Judaism, you got to be careful because there's not one monolithic Messianic Judaism. There are different doctrines and beliefs. He's making it seem like there's one whole monolithic Messianic Judaism. There is not. Each one of them hold different levels of authority to the Talmudic writings. Messianic Judaism oftentimes is connected to the Talmudic writings, and some people give it more authority than others. Some people believe in Messianic Judaism to a one law theology, like I do, right? Where they hold that the Torah is for the Gentile and the Jew alike. And then there's some in Messianic Judaism that hold that no, they follow the Noahic laws. They bring up this Noahic law thing that came forth from the Talmudic writings, not from the first century. And so there's a wide range within Messianic Judaism of different beliefs and doctrines on how authoritative the Talmud is and its writing and the Mishnah and so forth and how to read it. So there is a wide range. These guys have spoken to some who hold to Messianic Judaism, but they don't represent all of Messianic Judaism. And that's just a plain fact.
You dig in a little bit. For many people, they're probably just the same. You know, they sort of lump together messianics. You know, the Messianic Church, the Messianic movement, Messianic Jews, Messianic Gentiles, but not everyone. Not every word, every label means the same thing,
Right.
and that's what I try to explain in the book as well. I think it's very important.
That's good. Yeah. So I want to dig in on that a little bit.
We do not want to throw the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah. Right. Right. So I do want to spend a little.
I'm glad they admit it. Now, we need to practice it. We need to practice it more, right? So not everyone in Hebrew roots is going to be out in left field. There's going to be people that are. There's going to be people that aren't. There's going to be people that are out in left field in Messianic Judaism, people that aren't. Western Christianity, same thing. Same thing. They will even turn on each other and call each other heretics, and you're not in and of the faith. Not everyone in Western Christianity believes in the deity of Yeshua. There are Unitarians, and people like Rob, and I don't know about this gentleman where he falls with the deity of Yeshua, but Rob would call a Unitarian, someone who's not a full believer because he doesn't believe in the deity of Yeshua. I think Rob would. I would be surprised if he didn't, right? But that Unitarian claims to be a Christian just as much as Rob. He just doesn't hold to the deity of Yeshua. But I think Rob holds that is an essential doctrine of his faith. So the deity of Yeshua for me is an essential doctrine of my faith.
Little time on the differences between Messianic Judaism and Hebrew roots. It's something I've delved into as well. But before we get there, I wanted to kind of dig in on some of these historical roots.
Yes.
Now that you've kind of set the table.
Yes, sorry.
So, no, not at all. It's all right. So do you go all the way back to, the 1800s, the Millerites, the Sabbatarian type movements, or where do you see the very earliest?
I don't do it in my book, although we could do it. I mean, historically, there are forerunners that go back at least a couple of hundred years, I would say.
Yeah, it becomes difficult to catch that first thread.
Right. But in my research, what I found really fascinating was when I began to deal with
let's remember, the ruling empires of the day also controlled the information. Just look at America today and look at other countries today. They control the information that you get, and they will make sure all other information is eliminated. So finding that other information can be very scarce, right? I believe that the Nazarenes were all throughout time. They were there. There were remnants of Jewish believers, followers of Yeshua, who kept the Torah and so forth. They were never fully snuffed out. Okay. And the fact that the Lord is bringing back the truth of scriptures, it's by the power of the Holy Spirit. It's not by one particular people. And yes, there are groups of people that have perverted the truth, whether it's within Hebrew roots, whether it's in Western Christianity. They do pervert the truth. So that's why you have to study to show yourself approved. That's why we got to do our best to try and not make blanket statements. All Hebrew rooters believe this, all Christianity believes that.
With primary sources, take for instance the Worldwide Church of God. Herbert
So
Armstrong's
Armstrong.
group.
Yeah.
If you read their literature, it's so similar to what you can read online today that you would say, it's been penned by the same people. It's exactly the same way of couching arguments, exactly the same tenets.
I can go on a Catholic website and read about the Trinity and how some type of Catholic priest or theologian would explain the Trinity, and Rob would be like, "Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yep." But that doesn't mean that Rob holds to everything of the Roman Catholic Church and all their doctrine. I mean, I can go on different Hebrew roots sites and read their literature, their articles, and there can be pockets of things that they say that I can agree with. Doesn't mean that I agree with everything or that I want to be totally connected to that group or anything. Truthful statements can be made, all right, by groups that are not following the Bible correctly, but they can have pockets of truth within them. That's how come it can be so believable, right? But no, with Western Christianity, I can go to different Baptist sites and things, and I can agree with certain statements that they make about salvation and so forth. And then there's going to be plenty that I'm going to disagree with. But I could use that quote from that source, and if it's truth, it's truth. It doesn't matter who's saying it. It's a truth. And I could, post it and say, hey, I agree with this guy and what he just said about this topic or this situation. So please be careful.
Almost, exactly the same words, and that to me was quite a discovery. And I'm so sure that Hebrew rooters don't have a clue that what they're saying today, their claims against Christian holidays like Easter,
Yeah.
Christmas, and so on. Um, that was done and written and rejected by Christianity many decades ago. So it's nothing new. I mean, the Hebrew roots movement is not a new phenomenon. It's
Right.
just it's a rehash of many of the doctrines that we can see in the worldwide Church of God, or for instance in the Sacred Name movement,
Yeah.
which I mentioned.
So timeline wise, the Church of God was 1920s, 1930s. Is that right?
1930s, yes, and
Okay. So it's 100 years ago.
yeah, and so was the Sacred Name movement. Jacob Omeyer, the
Yeah.
main the main figure perhaps in the Sacred Name movement, and before.
Anybody who knows me knows I speak out against the sacred name movement. I speak out against it. Okay. So they're definitely not talking about me, and they're not talking about many within the Hebrew roots or Messianic Judaism either when they're talking about the sacred namers or the Herbert Armstrong, worldwide Church of God or whatnot. That is a sect within the Hebrew roots, but that would not represent everybody. Just like the Catholic Church, again, doesn't represent all of Christianity. There are hundreds of different denominations that would not line up with the Catholic doctrine.
Slightly before, I would say, Herbert Armstrong. And there, I mean, you've got it all there. You have two-house theology,
Yeah.
in perhaps not exactly the same form that we find today, although there isn't a single two-house theology. There are different flavors,
Yeah.
and one law theology. The Torah is meant for everyone, not just
Right.
Jews, but everyone. All of that you can find in the worldwide Church of God, and their writings and their emphasis on Sabbath keeping, for example. I
Sure.
mean, Armstrong wrote, it's in the book with the references. Armstrong wrote that if you don't keep the Sabbath, you cannot possibly be saved. I mean, that's plainly what he said. And if you
Yeah.
study Hebrew roots today, they are following the same argument. They they don't come at you at the very beginning.
I've got plenty of people that say if you follow the law of Moshe, you're a heretic and going to hell, you know. And the fact that you do keep Sabbath means you're going to hell, or that you keep the kosher laws, or that you keep the festivals and so forth. There are people in Western Christianity, they would say, nope, you're going to hell. You're a heretic. I mean, both sides go back and forth with each other in uncharitable ways. And even within each other, they're uncharitable at times to each other. It's a human thing. It's what people do. We're all battling not to do that. We're all battling telling people to stop doing that as best we can. And we've all fallen into it ourselves. We've all been guilty of it ourselves and had to apologize and repent and ask forgiveness of others because we got our arguments out of hand, or our debate. It doesn't mean we should stop doing it. It doesn't mean that we should be forbidding people from doing it. No, we have to wrestle with the scriptures, wrestle with the Bible, but we have to learn how to grow in maturity and learn how to do it cordially. And that can only happen when you engage and do it. It doesn't just automatically happen. I mean, playing football, playing basketball, you just don't automatically become good at it without practice, without engaging in it. Okay. It's the same with wrestling with the Bible and scriptures and different doctrines. We need to engage in it, but we need to do it in a cordial way. And not everyone's going to play fair on either side. That's just the bottom line.
And tell you, you won't be saved. You won't be saved. No, they clothed it somehow and say, well, it would be better if you started to keep the Sabbath, because Sabbath is the day that we are commanded to keep as the people of God. And
Right.
A lot of people like to start with the Sabbath because it's part of the 10 words. I mean, everyone wants to sit here and say the 10 words, and I say everyone again, probably not everyone. I've heard people say that the 10 words were nailed to the cross. We call them 10 commandments or whatever. But the 10 words is the, biblical definition and biblical terminology of it. The 10 words given at Sinai, a lot of people agree that's what we should be following. But then when we get to the fourth one, they want to all of a sudden make it Sunday, right? So there is oftentimes when we start introducing people back to the truth of the Torah, one place to start is the Sabbath. It really is. It's one of the 10 words that hasn't been done away with. So it is a good place to start, in my opinion.
Yeah, they don't start with the full. Yeah.
We are Israelites. I mean, we are not Christians. We are not Jews. We are not. We are Israelites because the Father has been calling us. We've heard His voice, and we were Gentiles among the nations because we had lost our identity. But now that we've answered that calling from the Father, the God, Elohim, or Adonai, or different ways of addressing the Lord, that proves that we are truly descendants of the 10 lost tribes. I mean, Armstrong already said that. So many years ago, he said, we are the descendants of the lost tribes. And he said, if you don't keep Sabbath, you will be lost. And he said, and we said, we must keep Passover and tabernacles and all the rest of it.
Every denomination does that. They don't take you into their deeper doctrines right away. They are going to introduce you to the salvation message, how they believe a person gets saved. They're going to teach you, all of the love chapters and how to love your neighbor and all that. All the denominations do that. And then you get shocked when you start digging into the history of that denomination and find out, oh, they believe in replacement theology. Oh, they used to burn synagogues and kill Jews. They believe in this, that you are an Israelite, you're an ethnic Israelite, you're part of the lost tribes or whatever. Every denomination has things that they don't tell you at first. And that's why you have to do the research when you belong to an organization, an assembly, congregation, or whatever. What is their doctrine? There are pastors that are standing up there that, within the history, there are people that believe unless you speak in tongues, you're not saved. But they don't sit there every week from the pulpit and preach that, right? So yeah, you have to find out what people believe, where you're going. It should matter. Some people just go to a place just because that's where their friends go. They've got good friends. They kind of like the pastor. They like the guy. He's a nice guy. He's a nice teacher. He seems to be teaching fine, but you don't know really where his doctrine is from till you get in there and really begin to press the questions or find out what denomination that person belongs to and then do your research, right? That's with every denomination. So these guys are saying something about the Hebrew roots movement that you should be doing with whatever denomination you go to, and all the denominations do it. They just do it. You have to do your homework.
And he said we need to eat kosher food, and so there's nothing new basically
Right.
about the Hebrew roots movement. It's just something that every now and again in history emerges again, seems to have a revival, a comeback.
Yeah.
But that's
Well, it all goes back to the Judaizers, right?
yes,
In Acts
yes,
15. And
yeah.
yeah.
The Judaizers were someone who forced you to become a Jew to be saved. It's not just practice Judaism. So again, he's got that anachronistic definition of Judaizer.
Yeah.
It's just rewarming. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was watching a video from a woman the other day. I think her name's Catherine, who was caught up in the Hebrew roots movement and left. And she said something. She had a great, and I hope I can have her on the show sometime, but she had a great analogy that describes what you just said.
The building, right?
It's the building, and you go in isn't that so cultish? Where you go in the first floor and it looks nice and inviting.
Because
then,
yeah. At first, they don't tell you.
You do that in any denomination. You go on the first floor, the sanctuary is inviting, nice people greeting you at the door. They're not handing you, here's our doctrines. Here's our doctrines. Make sure you understand our doctrines of everything we believe before you come in here. Nobody does that. You're trying to hold people to a standard that nobody does, that not even your denomination does. Okay? They do expect you to do your homework and research. I can't tell you how many times I've told people what their denomination believed and they were shocked. They've been going there for years. They just liked the guy. He preached nice. He preached about love. He preached about Yeshua and how to love one another and everything. And you get into but this guy went to this Bible college. This is what they believe. This is what they teach. This is the background of that denomination that you're a part of, right? And they're shocked, right? So yeah, it's with everybody.
You what's behind.
No.
Just give you some, it's a bait.
Right.
It's like a clickbait,
That's a very cult practice.
Right.
Of,
don't you think that if Jesus kept the Sabbath and went to the temple and the synagogues and on the Sabbath, don't you think that as disciples of Jesus we should be doing the same? And
right.
there you are. Just
it's plain and simple. That's what the apostolic writings taught, right? They didn't do away with the Torah. It's very basic, right? Now, yeah, when you get past that and you start saying, oh, you're an Israelite and you are of the lost tribes and all that, yeah, that would be shocking. And that is a false teaching, no doubt. That's not something I teach. Okay, it's not something, within Messianic Judaism, that they teach, right? So do your homework. Basically, do your homework. Every denomination to some degree does this. They're not going to tell you everything about them at first. Okay, they're going to put their best face on that first impression for every new visitor that comes to their congregation. You don't get into the deep stuff right away. No denomination does.
Think about it, sort of thing,
It's a compelling argument because for folks that aren't real biblically literate, they get in that gray area, and it can become, well, yeah, it does say walk as Jesus walked, and it does say keep my commands, and
right.
Why would Jesus do that and we don't have to? And so there's a little bit of part of it's hermeneutics, which you touched on, and I want to get into in a second. Part of it is just the general lack of what I call just biblical literacy. It's just knowing the general flow of the new covenant, you know?
Yep. And that's what I accuse Rob of missing. I haven't listened. This is my first time ever listening to Ruben Gomez, but I've done many videos on Rob, and you guys know my good friend Mitch Chapman. We've done many videos on Rob, on a Jew and Gentile discuss, and we will also be doing a video on this interview too, because I also want you guys to hear from Brother Mitch, coming from a Jewish perspective, what he thinks of this interview. And that I'm a Gentile, you're hearing my Gentile perspective coming from this angle. And so we are definitely planning on doing a video also where Brother Mitch will weigh in on this interview and share his thoughts on what is happening here.
And not being, that's why like I'm going through a Bible study right now, but it's with an apologetics approach,
right?
Because I want to pull these things out that sometimes get people tripped up.
He's actually doing a lot of eisegesis in his Galatians series, a lot of eisegesis. And so that's my perspective though, but you guys will have to judge for yourselves.
And just look at what scripture actually says, So let's talk a little bit about hermeneutics, because that's, I'm a fellow nerd and I love stuff like that. So you talk about, I forgot what you called it. Let's see. Oh, you call it Hebrewish. I don't know if that's it, yeah, but so yeah, just I guess speak generally about your thoughts on how do they, as you mentioned, come to these almost contrary conclusions about what the text is saying. Did you uncover a hermeneutical pattern?
Well, I think that it all has to do with the fact that progressive revelation is not something that they care too much about.
Right.
In other words,
that is false. That is false. That's something we care very much about. Progressive revelation, we see it from Genesis to Revelation. Progressive revelation. We see how from the 1st century all the way to the 4th century, how replacement theology came into the picture, became established, how man-made doctrines changed the God-ordained Moedim, the appointed times, and they didn't do it under God's authority. They didn't do it under the authority of Yeshua. They did it just because they wanted to, and they had an agenda that they wanted to do. They wanted to be no part of Judaism, no part of the Jews, and that drove their agenda. It's through progressive revelation and how the creeds and the doctrines and all came forth. We can see it. We are strong believers of progressive revelation to see how history unfolded.
Any text anywhere will mean what it means because we want it to mean that, and because we have adopted previously, in other words, our presuppositions are basically two house theology. There's the house of Israel, the northern tribes back in the day, which were lost after the Assyrians deported most of the population from Israel, from the northern tribes. So the two house would be the house of Israel and then the house of Judah. So Jews today are descendants of the house of Judah, the southern tribes, basically Judah and Benjamin.
Yeah.
And also the Levites, one might say,
Right.
Of course, there were many others, but they won't tell you that. So two house theology is very important. I mean, the worldwide Church of God also emphasizes two house theology, although they don't call it that. They talk about Anglo-Israelism.
So yeah, but that wouldn't be speaking of me and many others within the Hebrew roots movement, as you would call it. Okay, that would be speaking of a portion of the Hebrew roots, because again, when these names come out, these titles come out, and people start attaching themselves to it, we all don't agree that that's who we want to be attached to, right? You can call me a Christian. I have no problem with being called a Christian because The basic definition of a Christian is a follower of Messiah Yeshua. Okay. But the definition that a lot of people have when they say Christian is not the biblical definition of the first century, because Christians of the first century were all Torah followers that went to synagogue and kept Shabbat, whether you were a Jew or Gentile. So the Christian of the first century is not the definition of the Christian today. There, and people carry different definitions of what a Christian is. And unless you hold to their definition, you're really not a Christian. So it's going to be the same way with the two-house theology and all of that. So they're not speaking, 100% of people who would, be called a Hebrew roots person or Messianic Judaism or whatever. They're not speaking 100% of that.
Right.
So that's one leg, and the other
Okay,
one.
let me pause right there. I want to dig in just a little bit on that. Okay. So when you talk about the two-house theology and the concept, which I hear all the time, that Jews mean they're from the tribe of Judah, rather than meaning that they're descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right. I mean,
so are you suggesting that they begin with that presupposition that Jews only refers to the southern kingdom, and then every time they look through the New Testament and see the word Jew, that's the confirmation or the presupposition that they're bringing to the text?
Right. I mean, obviously, if you read the Bible, just read, and then, of course, interpret the Bible in its own context, and interpret one text through the other texts in the scriptures, you won't find that idea. You won't find two-house theology. So
I agree. And there are Hebrew roots groups out there that every time you see the word Gentile there in the apostolic writings, it means one of the lost tribes of Israel. That's what the word Gentile would be defined almost every time. Not every time, but when we're talking about believing Gentiles, when you're looking at the book of Romans and so forth, they think those are part of the lost tribes. Those are, they're Israelites, part of the lost tribes that had become Gentiles, become pagans, right? I don't hold to that teaching. Okay, but there are some in the Hebrew roots who have done that. That would be just as bad as replacement theology. To those who hold to replacement theology in Western Christianity, it's that bad. Okay, your replacement theology is just as evil and false as this type of theology, trying to say that where Gentiles is mentioned, that means you're part of the lost tribes. And if you believe in Yeshua and you've come to believe in Torah and you're a Gentile, you're just part of the lost tribes. No, you're not. That is false.
You don't derive it from the text. You don't do exegesis. You do eisegesis. You put it into the text, and then you find it again and say, I found it. But you found it because you put it there. It wasn't there. It's not there.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I'm going to do a part 2. I mean, we've been going quite a while here, over an hour. So I'm going to do a part 2 on this interview. This will just be part 1. This will, go on for a couple hours or so if I just do it all in one sitting. So I hope that you guys are getting my point here, that these guys are just far off with their, critiquing of the Hebrew roots and everything. We could do the same thing with Western Christianity. So we got to find some common ground. We got to find a way to talk and be able to share cordially with one another and not make these blanket statements. Okay, so that we can study to show ourselves approved and come to the truth. That is the goal. And so I do not believe that these guys, their Christianity does not go back to the first century. Hermeneutically, exegetically, it's not there in the Bible. A lot of their doctrines, not all of their doctrines, but a lot of their doctrines that they hold to just don't go back to the first century. All right. So yeah, we'll talk more about this in part 2. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm trying to be as fair as possible on both sides, because there are errors on both sides and there's truth on both sides. Okay. And that's where we need to weave through to find the truth. Amen. So blessings, everyone. And until we meet again, shalom.